Now that the Switch presentation has happened and we've gotten a clear look at what's going on for the system's launch, there's been some discussion about whether or not the Switch is having a soft launch. Is Nintendo planning a soft launch for the system? For those that don't know, a soft launch is a launch of a product where perhaps not all the features are available right at the start, or it's a bit of a test until the wider launch happens. So, I thought I'd look at some of the possible areas where it could be considered that the Switch is indeed having a soft launch. Now, there's been a big discussion about the amount of launch day titles for the Switch and how many of them are new. We know, I believe, 7 launch day titles right now. That was just I Am Setsuna was just added to that, but that number could go up between now and actual launch. But 7 right now, and when you look at the grand scheme of things and other platforms, unless you go far back into Nintendo's history, um, it's not a huge amount of titles. I mean, I don't have anything wrong with the number. I'm more interested in quality than quantity, but it isn't the grand scale that you saw PS4 and Xbox One launch with, somewhere between 20 to 25 titles, something like that. So if there aren't a ton of titles on launch day, you have to think about perhaps maybe developers just weren't able to get their stuff ready for launch, and that's why the lineup for the Switch is sprinkled throughout launch until late summer, early fall. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just looking at it as a potential indicator as to maybe the Switch is indeed getting a soft launch. Then you can talk about the amount of units that are going to be available at launch. There's 2 million from what we've heard. There's been a little discussion of 2.5 million, but it seems like 2 million is the number that everybody's settling in on. Now, 2 million obviously isn't any number to scoff at, and that's a lot to have available day one. But we don't know when the next shipment is after that, and as you can see from pre-orders, the 2 million is probably going to be gobbled up within the first week. Launch allotments in much of the world have already been spoken for, so those numbers are going to go very quickly. And I forget who it was, but somebody brought up a great point that the Switch is launching on the 3rd, and Nintendo's financial year comes to an end on the 31st of March, or somewhere right around there. So they wanted to get that 2 million units sold into that financial report, and then they'll talk about how many more units are coming for the Switch and when. So, like I said, 2 million isn't a ton. It's not a little amount, but it is enough to make you question just why there aren't going to be more units than that on day one. People have also been discussing just the amount of games that have been shown. So we've seen sizzle reels of titles, and I'd say maybe somewhere in the line of 30 to 35 titles that we've actually seen. There's others that we know about, but they're not coming until later, and we don't even have specific dates for them. So it could be another indicator that this is a soft launch, because more of those games are going to be coming out more towards fall and the holiday season. And obviously, that's a big time for game sales. So, right now, you have the fans that are diehards that are going to pick it up day one, or as close to day one as possible. And they'll be more than happy with the content that's available and provided until we get into the meatier part of the year where more titles are coming out. Speaking about titles available for the Switch, you have to look at Super Mario Odyssey. That's obviously going to be the centerpiece of Nintendo's Switch software lineup when it comes to the holiday season. That's going to be the big game that Nintendo has out. But by that point, Nintendo will have out a whole bunch of other games on the Switch. They'll have their first-party stuff, obviously, and then there'll be a whole bunch of other third-party and indie stuff there. So leading into the holiday season, when people look at the Switch and consider it for a purchase, they'll see that there's a sizable library there. I would guess I would guess around maybe 60 titles or something like that when you combine retail and digital. And then having Mario there at holiday is the icing on the cake. It's the little nudge that pushes you over the edge to pick the system up. And obviously, by that time, Nintendo will have more units ready to go, and you would suspect that they'd have a sizable amount of units to sell during the holiday season, or at least have them ready in the hopes that they will sell. So having Mario at the holiday just makes sense. Any year, of course, you want a big Mario game to launch during a big a big time for game sales, but I think Mario being in that part of the year with the Switch is actually more important and more of an indication as to when Nintendo's planning to really kick things into high gear for the system. So one of the really interesting ones to consider is that Switch's online features are going to be free for people that buy it between now and fall. So if you buy it day one, you're going to have a good amount of time to test what some of the online features are going to be like. I doubt all the online aspects will be there and in place. Those will come as we get closer to that fall season. But you're going to be able to play the Switch online and see some of the ideas that they have in place and see how some things work. And that could be because perhaps Nintendo doesn't have everything ready, or because they want to work with the 2 million people that are going to go online potentially and see how they're operating on the service and see what they're doing, getting feedback about what they like and what they don't like, just seeing how they go about their online interactions, and then making tweaks and getting things ready for the fall when it becomes the paid service. And again, that could be, part of moving away from the soft launch into the actual full-on launch of the system. So the early users could be sort of guinea pigs for online in a way, just to work out kinks and get a feel for what consumers think of what Nintendo's put out there, and then they can adjust accordingly, at least somewhat, when they move towards the paid aspect later this year. I think one of the biggest indicators of this potentially being a soft launch for the Switch comes from the state that the Wii U was in. I think even the most diehard Nintendo fan will admit that the last year of this Wii U wasn't very great when it comes to overall support, overall releases of software. There were certainly some great games that came out, especially from Nintendo, but just overall support around, even from Nintendo, was minimal. You got the feeling that Nintendo was very much getting ready to move away from Wii U and start working towards their new system. So we know the Switch started development 3 years ago, but obviously there were internal timelines and stuff like that that got shifted ahead because 3 years ago Nintendo wasn't suspecting that the Wii U would do or would have as rough a time in the market as it did have. So they adjusted things and they hit a point where they're like, well, we could take these Wii U projects and put them out there for the Wii U and just hope that they do well and perhaps readjust how our advertising for the Wii U is going. Or we could stop development of the games here and shift them over to the Switch. And obviously that's what happened. So it seems like, there was a big internal movement to say, all right, the Wii U just isn't going to work out for us. And we're going to have to do things sooner than we want to, but we want to get the Wii U out of the way and move towards the Switch. I mean, even if you go to Nintendo's official website, shortly after the Switch presentation, Nintendo removed some of the Wii U listings on their website, some of the icons and some of the wording and some of the options to click through. At the very top, you can still see Wii U there as a choice, but by and large, they removed a lot of that stuff. So Nintendo's very eager to move away from the Wii U just because it didn't do what they wanted it to. So it's important for them to get the Switch out there, and they wanted to get it out there soon. And that might be why we're seeing the type of lineup that we have and the type of software spread that we have and stuff like that, because Nintendo just wants to get it out there and get it in the hands of the fans that they know that are going to scoop it up no matter what, and then really build up that library and that support as we move towards the full-on launch later this year. Another thing comes from when Nintendo actually talked to developers about the Switch. Now, there were certainly a handful of high-priority developers that Nintendo reached out to as early as possible to discuss working on the system and potentially bringing games to it. And some of those we've seen announced, and some of those are yet to be announced. But there was also a large group of developers that didn't really get to see what the Switch could do until GDC last year. We heard that Nintendo had behind closed doors meetings at GDC with a number of developers to give them their Switch hands on and show them what the system could do. Hands on with prototypes and stuff like that, and then discuss hardware power and all those things. And some of those happened at E3 as well. But so considering that was at GDC last year, that'd be March. So a year's time to create and ship a game for the Switch isn't really a lot of time at all. It doesn't matter what system you're working for. A year's time isn't a big amount to do a turnaround like that. And that could be an indicator of why some of the companies that we've seen haven't shown too much in the way of original content and are opting for some ports because they need more time to work on those original games. And perhaps Nintendo will show some of those at E3, or perhaps we'll see them a little bit later on in the year. But it's interesting just to note how much time developers had to work with Switch. Like I said, the bulk of developers, there were ones that got earlier looks and earlier details, but by and large, GDC was very important for the Switch for Nintendo. So it just goes to show that maybe Nintendo had been thinking about this potential earlier launch as just a stepping stone to the big event this holiday season. Then finally, you have some of the elements that are not going to be there at the Switch's launch in March. You have, now you could consider these big or little personally. They don't mean much to me, but I know there's much talk about them, and they do mean things to people. And, it's not right or wrong. It's just what they want. Stuff like the video recording is not going to be there at launch. And Nintendo has said stuff like Netflix and multimedia apps aren't going to be there. They said very many multimedia apps, so I don't even know if there's going to be any at day one. But they said they're looking to add that stuff in a future update. And for me personally, I have a dedicated device. I have two dedicated devices for doing that stuff, for doing the multimedia content like Hulu and Netflix and Crunchyroll and whatever else you want to lump in there. So I'm not too fazed by that, but again, I know people are, because I did a poll on our Twitter account to see how many people were using game consoles as their main device to stream content like that. It was more than a third of people were using that. So there's definitely people that are going to pick up the Switch and want to have those features, and are hoping that Nintendo has them in there. And you know how cagey and secretive Nintendo can be. I'd be very surprised to learn that they aren't talking to any of those platform holders right now, or content providers, to set things up. And I have no doubt that there are going to be some multimedia apps for the system, but perhaps they're not ready because the timeline given to those developers was later. Or Nintendo's focus wasn't on getting those guys for March. They want to get those guys ready for the holiday season, when people are going to unbox their systems and hook them up in front of TV all together with family, and then experience all that stuff. So the early adopters are just going to have to wait, but perhaps we could see that stuff later on when we hit the holiday season. I just find it really interesting to consider this potentially being a soft launch for the Switch. I'm perfectly happy with what the system is going to have launch day, let alone launch month and the things that come thereafter. I'm extremely excited. It's hard for me not to be excited about video game consoles when I launch. I'm just into games, but I'm very much looking forward to it, and I'm going to use the Switch as an excuse to play some games that I missed out on otherwise, as well as the new games like Snipperclips and 1-2-Switch and Breath of the Wild. But it's interesting to think about, and it could potentially be a really good thing for Nintendo to have this early launch and get that feedback and see where people are at. Because then they could put the wheels in motion for things later on down the road, and potentially have some of that ready for holiday season. So, like I said, this isn't a knock against the Switch at all, or this isn't. I'm not saying that the Switch isn't ready for launch. I feel what they have is more than good enough. I am legitimately excited, but you have to do some other things to woo other people. Obviously, like you've seen in online discussions all over the internet. So potentially, Nintendo can have this soft launch and get the thing out there, and then collectively in all areas put something together so that when the holiday season does get here, they'll have more units ready. They'll have more software out there. They'll have some big names in their own roster coming out. They'll have more features ready to go on the system, and that'll be a more compelling package for people to potentially look to pick up. I certainly hope that's the case. But this is a fact that can be debated because Nintendo's never going to say that it was a soft launch. They're not going to discuss that. And, they'll just say a launch is a launch if they're going to say anything. So that leaves the discussion up to us. I want to ask you guys, do you think this is a soft launch for the Switch? Hit us up in the comments and let us know. I'd love to see what you think. Hey guys, RMC here from Go Nintendo. If you like what you saw in the video, why don't you give us a thumbs up and maybe even subscribe? We'd love to have you. If you want to see what else we're up to, you can check out GoNintendo.com for 24-hour Nintendo news. You can visit us on Facebook at Facebook.com/GoNintendo. You can check us out on Twitter at Twitter.com/GoNintendoTweet. And we're even over on Instagram at Instagram.com/GoNintendo. I put all the links in the description just to make it easier for you guys to follow. Thanks a lot.